Hi everyone, so today's video is going to be about in-house movements and whether they're worth it, whether you should buy a watch with an in-house movement in it. It's just a bit of a discussion, it's just my own opinion, and there's no kind of standardized way that I've applied, the logic that I'm going to be going through. So I am looking for a watch, my next watch, and one of the considerations is obviously the movement. And over the last few years, watch manufacturers have started to use in-house movements much more in their watches. So Tudor is probably the most obvious example, and then I think Breitling and I think Oris have recently released an in-house movement, and it got me thinking about whether it's worth it as against other types of movement that you could get in a watch. So an in-house movement is a movement that has been manufactured by the company that makes the watch. So for example, Grand Seiko produces their movements themselves. They don't get ETA movements or Sellita movements or whatever else, other types of movements. And a lot of watch manufacturers are, I think, for partially because of prestige, they want to say, we've made this movement ourselves, and that'll add to the status, if you like, of the watch. And to a certain extent, I agree, because you get a watch. I'm wearing the Rolex Explorer, and that is a watch with an in-house movement in it. As far as I'm aware, the movement is completely created and designed by Rolex, and it's not based on any other movements. I think the first thing about in-house movement is whether a movement is an in-house movement or not, because I think one of the things that I read about the BL1 movement, which is the movement that powers some of Breitling's chronographs, that was developed by Tudor and Breitling. So it's an in-house movement of both companies and yet neither, which is quite interesting. And another thing that I've been thinking about recently, I've been thinking about trying to be more pragmatic with the way that I buy watches. So Rolex Explorer, 10-year service interval. I imagine it's going to cost maybe £600 to get this watch serviced. So if I have, 2 or 3 luxury watches with in-house movement in them, potentially I'm not going to be able to afford to have them serviced. So I thought, in terms of service costs, that is a reason not to buy an in-house movement. And I was actually reading something on a forum related to Tudor and their in-house movements, and it was quite interesting. It basically said that, I'm just looking at my phone to find the article. Basically it said, and I don't know if this is true, so tell me if it is or if it isn't, when you send a Tudor in with an in-house movement, you don't necessarily receive the same movement in the watch when it comes back. So they have a centralized service center, if you like, where they service all of the movements, and you might get a pre-serviced in-house movement, which is quite interesting. I found that, I don't know if shocking's the word, but if I sent my watch into Rolex, I would want the same movement to come back, and I would want to be told if that wasn't the same movement. And people seem to be disagreeing over whether it is the case that happens, but it is an interesting one and something to think about. But in terms of whether to buy a watch with an in-house movement, basically a lot of people think that the servicing cost will be greater, and that is a reason maybe not to. So for example, someone on this forum cited the El Primero and said, you might be looking at a $1,000 service cost, and you can't just send it to any old watchmaker because it's quite a complicated and idiosyncratic movement. So you might prefer to get a in-house movement, because you can send that to basically anyone, an ETA movement or a Value movement or whatever, and they can service it. And that is maybe why these watch brands are going down this trend of in-house movement, so they can get as much money out of their customers as possible, if you like. And apparently, if you think about in-house movements with Tudor, for example, they've only started to develop them in the last few years. So are they going to have flaws that have not been spotted? Are they going to be more finicky? Are they going to break more often? then is that going to cost you or me more money in the future? And I think one of the other things that I was thinking of in terms of in-house movement, and again, this might not be the case, it might just be me, but I like Tudor watches. I think they're well designed. I think they look attractive. I would buy one, but they're too thick. The latest GMT is 14.6 millimeters thick, if I remember correctly. And basically that's way too thick for a watch that you're paying, what, $5,000 for in the case of the new root beer, or $3,000 for the original steel. You know, these watches should be perfect. And I was reading something else on a forum the other day that said, you know, why are you being so finicky about 2 millimeters or whatever? But you know, it is important. If you're paying so much money for these watches, you do want them to be perfect. And 14.6 millimeters is ridiculous as a thickness for a watch like that. And is that down to the in-house movement? Is it because they don't maybe have the expertise to be able to develop a thinner movement, or a thinner movement will cost so much more? So in order to keep costs down, they are going with the thicker movement. I mean, tell me if you know. I'm not sure, but if the Black Bay GMT was 2 millimeters thicker, that new root beer is, I think it's an awesome watch. I think the two-tone I like, and the GMT with the bezel, I think it's the most useful watch that you can buy, really, because you can time things, and obviously the GMT function, but it's just too thick. And the other obvious thing is the idea that if you get an in-house movement in your watch, it kind of adds to the prestige and the workmanship, if you like, of the watch. So, you know, if you get a Tag Heuer and it's got a bog standard Sellita or ETA movement in it, then they've just got the watch, they've designed it to make it look nice, and then they've bunged in this third party movement, and that almost feels like the antithesis of the things that a lot of watch buyers, particularly watch fans like us, want. But then when you've got the in-house movement, you've got something that's been, you know, crafted and created specifically for this watch, specifically for this company, and that is a really good thing, particularly if you've just got one watch and you want it to be as authentic as possible. And that's something that I love about watches and things like fashion and things like that, when they are authentic. And this Rolex Explorer is completely designed in-house. The movement is in-house, and that's something that I really like. I personally would not be able to afford anything higher than that, like Patek Philippe, so this is the best and most authentic piece that I could afford. Whereas I guess you lose some of that if you go down the route of a watch with an ETA or a Sellita movement or something of those types. But I guess it depends upon whether you see that as a positive or negative, because, you know, you're going to pay more for the service, you're going to perhaps see flaws that you haven't seen in ETA movements, which are more tried and tested, and they're going to be more serviceable by anybody. So that's the end really of the discussion. Sorry if it was a little bit wayward, but it's just something that I've been interested in recently, because I've been kind of thinking about being more practical with the watch buying. So, you know, do I really want 3 in-house movement watches in my collection when they could all break at the same time or need servicing at the same time, and that's going to be £1,500 or something like that to get them serviced? Whereas if I get an ETA, it'll be much more reliable, much more cheap and cost effective to service. So I think at the moment I'm erring on the side of, yeah, in-house movements are great if they are genuinely in-house, if they minimize the things like the thickness on the Tudor, and if you don't have too many of them. Whereas I think I'm moving towards more quartz is okay, ETA is okay, because it does serve a purpose, and it does give you real benefits in the watch. If you can think of anything else about in-house movements to share with me in the comments, then please do. And if you like the channel, please subscribe. And thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.